Caitlyns Adventure. Long ago lived a little caterpillar named Caitlyn. Caitlyn was not like other caterpillars. She loved beautiful things. She wore glasses so that she could see beyond her world of twigs and leaves and blades of grass. She wanted to see all the beautiful things the world had to offer. Caitlyn collected beautiful things in her mind. Each day, she searched for beauty in her tiny world. Before she went to sleep each evening, she decided what had been the most beautiful thing she had seen that day and stored it in her memory. Caitlyn spent most of her days chomping on leaves and wondering about all the beautiful things she might discover if she could leave her world of twigs and leaves and blades of grass. One day, Caitlyn was munching on a juicy piece of grass when she noticed something shiny. She went over to see what it was. Why, it was a tiny crown, and it was beautiful. Caitlyn looked around to see who might have lost the crown, but there was no one in sight. She inched and squirmed until she was under the crown. Then, gently, she lifted her head. The crown fit perfectly. Well, almost. Caitlyn could hardly believe that at last she had something beautiful of her very own. Now her world of twigs and leaves and blades of grass was perfect. But Caitlyn knew that the crown did not really belong to her and that someone must be looking for it. She asked the ants, "Has anyone lost a crown?" The ants were so busy they hardly had time to answer her. "Not ours," they said. "Try Queen Bee." Of course, Caitlyn thought to herself, it must belong to Queen Bee. She is the only one I know who wears a crown. Caitlyn set off in search of the queen. Caitlyn had not actually been to the hive. It was a long way from her world of twigs and leaves and grass. She had to ask directions several times. Finally, she arrived at the hive. But as soon as she saw the queen, she knew that the crown did not belong to Queen Bee. Caitlyn really did not mind that she could not find the crown's owner. The crown was her own special treasure, and she took very good care of it. Each morning before she put the crown on, she would shine the gold and polish the jewels. Early one afternoon, just before Caitlyn settled down for her nap, a slight breeze stirred the twigs and leaves and blades of grass. Caitlyn knew this was no ordinary breeze, for it only touched a very small area. Caitlyn searched to find the cause. Finally, she found it. One of the woodland fairy people was flying by. Caitlyn had heard of the fairy people, but she had never actually met one. "Hello!" called Caitlyn. The fairy flew closer. "My name is Caitlyn." Suddenly, the fairy swooped down and landed right next to Caitlyn. For a long time, the fairy just stood there and stared at her. Finally, she smiled. "My name is Fiona," whispered the fairy. Caitlyn smiled too. Then Fiona spoke the words Caitlyn dreaded hearing. "You found my crown!" Fiona cried excitedly. "I am really a fairy princess. One night I was caught in a terrible storm. The wind blew my crown off. It was so dark and rainy that I couldn't find it. Why, it looks like new!" Caitlyn smiled and nodded. Then, sadly, she wiggled out of the crown. The crown looked wonderful on Fiona, and Caitlyn was glad that she had taken good care of it. "I would like to thank you for taking such good care of my crown," said Fiona. "I will return tomorrow morning to grant you one wish." Fiona was gone almost before she finished the sentence. Caitlyn could hardly believe her ears. She had not expected any reward. The fairy princess would grant her one wish. The little caterpillar's head whirled. What would she ask for? Perhaps a heavier coat, for winter was coming. Or a pile of leaves and grass so big that she could invite all her friends for dinner. Or maybe a crown like Fiona's. Poor Caitlyn was awake all night trying to decide on her wish. What about a pair of wings like Fiona's? Then she could see all the beautiful things the world had to offer. Just as the sun rose, Caitlyn fell fast asleep. She dreamed of a pair of wings that would take her anywhere she wanted to go. Caitlyn was still asleep when Fiona came to grant the wish. The fairy princess looked into the caterpillar's dream. "A pair of wings," murmured Fiona. Fiona sprinkled fairy dust over the sleeping caterpillar, then gently spun a silken fairy blanket over her. Fiona touched the blanket with her wand, then flew away. Caitlyn yawned and stretched. She felt as though she had been asleep for weeks. She stretched again and opened her eyes. All she could see was fuzz. She pushed and pushed until she got through whatever was covering her. The first thing she saw was Fiona smiling at her. Caitlyn smiled back. "I hope you are pleased with your wish," beamed Fiona. Caitlyn shook her head. She didn't remember making any wish. Then she saw her reflection in a puddle. She couldn't believe her eyes. She had wings! Not tiny ones like Fiona's, but big, beautiful wings. They were wonderful. Caitlyn fluttered each wing, then she fluttered them together. Suddenly, her feet were off the ground, and she was flying. Fiona flew with her, and they laughed together. Caitlyn looked down on her world of twigs and leaves and blades of grass. Everything was so beautiful. All day long, the two new friends flew over the countryside. They flew to farms and cities. They flew as far as the ocean. Caitlyn was delighted at how big her world was. It was as she had guessed. There were many new and interesting things to see beyond her world of twigs and leaves and blades of grass. At the end of the day, the caterpillar and fairy stopped to rest on a twig. "Thank you, oh, thank you," exclaimed Caitlyn. "I just love my new wings. They're wonderful." "May I keep them?" she asked shyly. "Forever and ever," said Fiona. Caitlyn sighed happily. "I wish my friends could have enjoyed this day with us." Fiona smiled. Then she became thoughtful. "I could give the other caterpillars wings so they could see the world for themselves. But they can never change back to caterpillars," Fiona warned. Caitlyn became excited. "I'm sure they wouldn't mind. After all, there are so many more things to see and do when you have wings." So Fiona went back and gathered more fairies to help with the work of changing all the caterpillars. Each fairy had a different idea about what colors the beautiful wings should be, so each carried her own special blend of fairy dust. When a caterpillar fell asleep, a fairy would sprinkle it with fairy dust, spin a silken fairy blanket around it, then touch it with her wand. When the caterpillars awoke, they had beautiful pairs of wings in all the colors of the rainbow. Princess Fiona gave wings to all of Caitlyn's relatives. She had chosen the fairy dust, which colored the wings orange and black. It was thought that because the princess personally touched Caitlyn and her relatives, a little bit of royalty rubbed off on them. The orange and black-winged creatures became known as monarch butterflies. Even now, the fairies are still busy changing caterpillars into butterflies. The end.